Have you had clients where it doesn't feel like anything is happening when you ask them to contract their pelvic floor muscles? Like their pelvic floor muscles just don't know how to function? Well, in today's podcast, I share with you a four-step process for improving pelvic floor muscle function to create a stronger and easier contraction with a lot less work for you as the practitioner.
Hello, friends. This is Lynn Schulte, and you are listening to the Birth Healing Summit podcast. We are here for meaningful conversations that will transform the way you work with pregnant and postpartum clients. Whether it is a new perspective, tool, or technique, you'll be able to implement it into your practice today. I invite you to sit back, listen with an open mind, and grab the golden nugget today's guest has to offer. Now let's get started.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode. And today I want to talk about what can we do when you find the pelvic floor muscles just don't have that automaticity of that strong on-off, where you get a weak pelvic floor muscles, or you notice when you evaluate them that the um, the only parts of the muscle are actually contracting. Like, what do we do to get all of those muscles to come on board? And I have to say that I am constantly amazed in my clinical sessions at the ability for the pelvic floor muscles to change and get stronger in one session. And I just so desire for everybody, every pelvic floor PT, to be able to get the same results. And so I want to share with you some of the things that I'm doing in order to get the muscles to contract better. And there's four areas that we're going to cover today. And the first one, and you have all, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know I love talking about the pelvic bones. And the pelvic bones are such an important piece to the puzzle when we're talking about pelvic floor muscle function. And really, the pelvic bones, the pelvic floor muscles can give you a sense of what's actually happening with the pelvic bones. And what I find is that if the coccygeus muscles or the deeper levator ani muscles, if they're not able to contract well, then I'm initially going to look at sacrum. Is the sacrum stuck in flexion? And what can I do to encourage that to come more anteriorly? That really can make a huge impact in the coccygeus muscles. I did another episode talking about what the sacrum tells us about the pelvic floor muscles, or what the coccygeus tells us. If we have bilateral tension, that's an indicator for sacral flexion. If we have a unilateral tension in the coccygeus muscles, that may mean that the sacrum is shifted or sheared off to one side. And we can help correct that and then balance out the tone between the coccygeus muscles. The ischial splay is going to be important for any of the levator ani muscle group if there's any pull in those. Puborectalis, pubococcygeus, those are affected by sacral flexion. If that sacrum is pulled back posteriorly, then that's going to put tension on those muscles, which may make it more challenging for them to be able to contract. And think about the tip of the tailbone. The tip of the tailbone, if that's pulled back from sacral flexion, that has a direct connection to the through the anococcygeal raphe to the external anal sphincter muscle and internal anal sphincter muscle, and that whole complex there. And Nicole Cozine and I had a wonderful conversation talking about the ishiorectal fossa and the impact of that structure alone. And I shared in there how ischiosplay, sacral flexion, is going to put tension on the ishiorectal fossa. So all of the tissues, if you have a superficial tight transverse perennial body, think about an ischial splay, and doing a medial mobilization to the ischium can help decrease the tension in that transverse perennial muscle. And so the pelvic bones really do get impacted by birth and falls and habits. I remember sitting once I have a bench at my kitchen table, and sometimes I'll slide into the end of the bench and I'll be sitting with more pressure laterally on my ischial tuberosity, forcing it medially. And I remember saying, and I'll tuck up that leg, I'll tuck up my right leg as I slide in towards the right. And I'll be sitting there, and I remember even noticing this one day. I'm like, oh, wow, I really have a lot of medial compression on my ischial tuberosity. Huh, did I move? No, I should have, but I didn't. And I stayed there for 20, 30 minutes, who knows how long. But then that night, I was going to play tennis, and my right low back area, right around the sacroiliac joint, was just aching. And I was just like, huh. So I did, some pelvic tucks and rotations, anterior posterior rotations of the ilium, and that didn't create any pain. I was bending my spine and arching, extending my spine. That wasn't creating any pain. And I'm like, God, what is this? What is this? And it's like, it's not, it didn't feel like a joint. And so then as I was playing tennis, I remembered that I had sat on the bench that day in that cockeyed position, really putting force on the ischial tuberosity medially. Well, everybody, the ischial tuberosity is the same bone as the ilium. And what I realized is that my ilium was just a little outflared. And the ischium had gone medially, so my iliac crest had gone laterally. So I just took my hand and I cupped it around the iliac crest, and I just compressed in medially, and my backache went away. My ache in my back was gone. And it really didn't take that much force. And that to me just really hammered home this relationship between ilium and ischial tuberosities and how they are like a seesaw in there. And it can have that effect. And, I've felt in that ilium ischium almost like a twisting that's happened sometimes during pregnancy. And so we just need to expand our horizons when we're dealing with the pelvis and not just deal with anterior, posterior rotations, upslips, and outflares. Okay, guys? There is way more going on in the pelvic bones than that. And that's all I was taught in PT school, and even in like SI joint classes and things like that. So everybody, please know that there is way more that is happening in the pelvis than just anterior posterior rotations and inflare, outflares, and upslips. Okay. So the bones, that's the first thing. Like if those pelvic floor muscles are not functioning well, figure out which muscles aren't coming to the party, and then then figure out what bones of the pelvis might be impacting that. Okay. Then the next thing that you want to look at is the organs of the pelvis intravaginally. The pubococcygeal or the pubocervical fascia and the endopelvic fascia all play into tensions in the pelvic floor area. And when I notice any restrictions or difference side to side from the anterior vaginal wall, right behind the pubocervical fascia is the bladder, everybody. And you can appreciate whether that bladder is sitting nice in midline or whether it's mushed off to one side, which happens during pregnancy. And then we need to get the bladder back into midline, get bladder happy, reassess your pelvic floor muscles. You notice a change then, but I notice the biggest change when I get cervix mobilizing and moving well in there as well. So after you work with the bladder, then we got to make sure that that cervix has the ability to be like a piñata in there vaginally. And it needs to be able to move 360 and up and down. And if it can't, there's cardinal ligament tension laterally, uterosacral ligament tension posteriorly. And let's think about what happens when the sacrum is stuck in flexion. What tension, how is that increasing the tension in the uterosacral ligament? We know that the uterosacral ligament either attaches into the sacrum or the sacrococcygeal complex, the sacrotuberous coccygeal complex. And those attachments, if they are restricted in any way, they may be restricting the pelvic floor muscles, which I find all the time. I had a client that I saw her one time, and she came in and she had worked with other physical therapists in the area. And she's just like, I just wasn't as cool, or, I just didn't care for the care that I got there at the end. And so I wanted to try something new. So I'm here. And I tell you what, I blew her away because she was able to feel and sense when that uterosacral ligament let go. Her left side was tight and her cervix was off to the left. So cardinal ligaments, uterosacral ligaments were tight on the left. Her pelvic floor muscles, there were like 40%, a lot of effort to make 40% happen. Okay. And then we released the uterosacral ligament and she just felt the melting happening in her body as that ligament released, which I'm so addicted to, you guys. If you haven't felt that release and that tissue just melting, oh my goodness, please come to a live course so I can introduce you to what that feels like because I'm addicted. I am absolutely addicted and love feeling that like, oh, as the muscles and the tissues just melt underneath your hands. And she felt it too. And she like actually it brought up tears for her. And so I was just like, let that feel that 200%. She didn't need to name it. She just got emotional as that uterosacral ligament released. And then we did a little bit with the cardinal ligament. She could also feel another release there. She was also stuck in flexion, sacral flexion. So we worked on correcting that and the bones. And she's like, oh, my other therapist never worked with any of these things that you're working on. I'm like, I know they're missing a big piece of the puzzle, everybody. That's why I'm telling you about this. So thank you for listening. So uterosacral ligament, we've got to be able to release that. And then get the bladder, the uterus, the cervix nice and mobile there, and then go check out the pelvic floor muscles because by then it is so different. The pelvic floor muscles usually have more of a turn on, turn off. However, if they don't, then we address the muscles directly and we work with the bones and the muscles together. Please learn how to do the Schulte hold. It's a game changer for doing intravaginal work, getting the muscles to release. And then the external and internal anal sphincter muscle is another structure that you need to, in the IRF, the ischiorectal fossa, that whole area needs to be addressed because if there's still not that easeful on off of the muscle, then the EAS may be contributing to it because there is always tension in that EAS after birth. There's knots in that muscle. So please make sure this client that I just saw, she's like, oh, I had a grade three tear. But in actuality, I didn't feel it go directly down. It was like there was at 4 o'clock, between 3:30, let's say, there was a lateral tear that went really deep, but it didn't go into the sphincter muscle. She did have other scar tissue at 7, 8 o'clock, but that didn't go into the sphincter muscle itself. And I go, I wonder if they're calling it a grade 3 just because of how far down that lateral tear went. Sorry, this is a totally another client that I'm thinking about. Not the first one that I talked about, but this gal came in with a grade, saying she had a grade 3 tear, and her lateral tear was really deep. That had it been more inferior, it would have gone into the sphincter muscle. But she did have 7, 8 o'clock tension there that it really didn't impact the sphincter muscle. However, there was tension in the sphincter muscle. So releasing all those knots in there is super, super important to get better contraction of the pelvic floor muscles. And then so the EAS and that whole complex, IRF, EAS, lots of letters there, but that is a very, very important aspect of the pelvic floor that needs to be addressed to get better function of the pelvic floor muscles. And then the last piece of the puzzle is trauma. Is that trauma response being held in the tissues? We need to address nervous system too, But I had one client that I saw, and her left side muscles just were not coming to the party. Right side was stronger, but left side just, there was just this sluggishness to them. And as I tuned into like, so I did the bones, did the organs. Then I was tuning in, trying to get the levator ani group on the left side to kick in. And as I just tuned into them, I'm like, yeah, there's something being held in there. And there was a limiting belief. I think it was a trauma response from the birth that held a limiting belief, and we shifted that. And boy, did that turn that muscle back on. And she was amazed when she, after that released. And really, guys, when you release that trauma response, when you release that limiting belief, again, the muscles just melt and then they're able to function better. So, learning how to shift limiting beliefs, learning how to work with trauma in the body is so important for overall function of this area. And if you're trying to get the pelvic floor muscles to contract stronger and easier, that's the key. The pelvic floor muscles should be able to turn on, turn off, just like you turn on a light switch, just like you open and close your hand. And if there's all this efforting and they're, using their entire body to get the pelvic floor muscles to contract, there's something more going on, guys. And these are some areas that you can look at to help get the pelvic floor muscles to function better. So please keep in mind, know your anatomy, understand the connections between when the sacrum is being lifted backwards, how's that impacting the cervix and the uterosacral ligament? And if the ischium is splayed more, how is that impacting the sacrotuberous ligament, sacrospinous ligament, and all the pelvic floor muscles that it attaches to, and not to mention the pudendal nerve. So Alcock's canal, all those things like the pathway of the pudendal nerve can be greatly enhanced by making sure that the bones are in their proper place and these structures are have less tone in them. Okay, so we need to understand our anatomy. We need to understand the connections between everything. And I'm telling you, everyone, there is a way to get the pelvic floor muscles to respond very quickly in a session, one session. And then they've got this massive contraction, and there's like, oh my gosh, that's so much easier. It's like, yes, you can do that too. Please, if you haven't already, if you bought my courses, complete the darn thing. If you haven't, please come visit me. I'm going to be at a lot of places next year or this year. I'm not sure when this episode's being aired, but come join me for a live course if you have never felt the tissues melt and release in the body, because it's fun. It is so fun and it feels so good. It feels good to me. It feels good to your clients. And it's just amazing. And I want to share this amazement with you. I also want to let you know that if you want to learn more about the trauma piece and how to work with shifting limiting beliefs, that's in the Birth Healing Intensive program. That's going to start end of January. You have till mid-January to register if you want to join us next year. So I would just love to share this with you and be able to allow you to have these really fun, amazing sessions where you get pelvic floor muscles to be able to respond so much better. And it's astonishing. I am constantly astounded in my sessions with how much change can happen in the body in one session. So we all need to get these kinds of results so we can see more clients and get more women the help and the support that they need. So I just am so passionate about this work because it's so darn effective. And thank you for letting me gush about this and share my astonishment with you. And hopefully it helps. So thank you everybody for listening in. Here is to smoother births, faster recoveries, and stronger pelvic floor muscle function. We'll see y'all on the next podcast, everybody. Bye-bye.
Today's podcast was brought to you by the Institute for Birth Healing. To discover more, visit instituteforbirthhealing.com. To claim $50 off of any online course, use coupon code PODCAST50 at checkout. Till next time, I'm Lynn Schulte, founder of the Institute for Birth Healing.